Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Securing Active Directory, Proactively Detecting Attacks and Attack Pathways. Today's event is brought to you by Alsid and produced by Actual Tech Media. Now, before we get started with today's webinar, there's a little bit of housekeeping here that we first need to cover. I want you to know that this should be an educational webinar. We want you to get your questions answered. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event, and we have experts available to answer your questions throughout today's presentation. So get your questions in early and submit them throughout the event, and we'll be doing our best to answer every one of those questions that come in. This is a hot topic. I know many of you are concerned about security around Active Directory, so this is a great opportunity to learn as much as possible. We will be announcing the winner of an Amazon $300 gift card on today's live event. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Prize terms and conditions can be found at events.actualtechmedia.com. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. Many of you may know him from the books that he's written, the presentations that he's given at conferences. That is Mr. Derek Melber, Microsoft MVP and Technical Director for North America at Alsid. Derek, thank you for being here. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And I just want to thank everyone for taking a little bit of time out of your day to spend some time with us. And I know it's difficult to get away from work. And now that we're working from home, maybe this will be a little bit of a reprieve from your normal activities. I definitely have some great information available for you today. We're going to be talking about raw Active Directory security. And I hope that I'll be filling in some gaps of information for some of you. Certainly some of the information we'll go over are things you know, but what I want to do is I want to basically shed some light on really this idea of Active Directory security, and I want to give you a different perspective. Just to kind of elaborate a little bit further on what David said, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself for those of you who don't know who I am. I've kind of been in this industry for a little bit. I've written about 16 books over the last 20 years. One of the books that you may have on your desk at work or maybe next to you now is the Group Policy Resource Kit. This was written back, in the 2007 timeframe, and definitely it is a good resource and the last resource that Microsoft actually wrote on group policy. But beyond that, I have spent a tremendous amount of time in front of people over the last 6 years. Did a lot of touring of the world. I would go to over 25 countries a year, do about 125 to 150 presentations, helping the worldwide Active Directory community. I'm also an MVP. Over the last 20 years, I've been an MVP 15 times, both in Active Directory and in group policy. And today, I work for Alsid, and I'm the Technical Director for North America. Many of you maybe haven't heard of Alsid, but it is an up-and-coming raw Active Directory security company that is looking at the details of Active Directory from a totally different perspective. And we'll shed some light on that as we go through today. So that's a little bit of information about me, and kind of as a foundation for what we're going to cover today, let's talk a little bit about the agenda. And what I want to do is walk you through this process to kind of get you engaged with different areas of Active Directory and why it's important to look at this. So first of all, I want to talk about really why the attackers are going after Active Directory. And then I want to talk about what they're going after within Active Directory and shed some light on why traditional, or what I would call traditional AD solutions aren't working completely to stop the attacks. So we'll talk about a little bit about SIEM solutions as well as some AD monitoring solutions that I'm sure many of you have. And then what I want to do is I want to talk specifically about misconfigurations, as well as something called attack pathways. And these are very important when we talk about securing Active Directory from a core foundational perspective. So that's our agenda, and then at the end we'll take some questions, and then I will let you get back to your day. But let's really start off with some core concepts around why Active Directory is so easy to attack and why the attackers are going after. Now, from my perspective, Active Directory hasn't really changed that much since its inception back in 2000. So we have a very stagnant identity and access management solution. And when you get a stagnant situation, basically what happens is the attackers have lots of time to look at the inner core of the environment. And over 20 years, that's what the attackers have done. So if you think back when Active Directory was installed for your environment right now, I'm going to guess it was, before 2010. And I mean, if it were installed in 2005, a lot of the core concepts that we're paying attention to now within Active Directory, we didn't even pay attention to back then. So the issue that we have is we have an environment that was created 10, 15 years ago. When we installed it 10 or 15 years ago, we didn't pay attention to the details. So what is happening is we have a stagnant environment that those details weren't corrected. So we have a lot of attack surface within Active Directory. And I'm finding this in most Active Directory installations. So it's not only the settings, but also procedures. If we look at some of the procedures that are built into the architecture of Active Directory, for example, SD-prop, the security descriptor propagation to secure privileged accounts, it was built in there, but we just kind of let it go, and it's there, but the attackers are taking advantage of this. For example, not only SD-prop, but also service principal names, authentication protocols with LAN manager and NTLM. And you got to consider back in 2005, we trusted our users. We didn't think they were going to attack the infrastructure, but that's exactly what's happening. So if we look at the core of what everyone has, it's flawed. And the issue with that is the attackers know how to get in, and we're going to talk about that soon. The attackers know how to get this information, so we need to get there first and shim up the misconfigurations and know what an attack path is. And it's also easy to attack because if you think about the insiders in our organization, the insiders have read access to Active Directory. Very easily, the insider can go in to Active Directory and read everything that's there. With tools like LDP, tools like PowerShell, now your users, your employees can read information in Active Directory and they can find out where to attack. And of course, insiders have direct network access. Now, maybe today they have VPN access, but they still have direct access directly to Active Directory when they authenticate. To take this to the next level, the attackers are also getting access, and they're getting access through our endpoints. So one thing that I'm going to really hammer over and over again is we must secure our endpoints. These endpoints are the ingress of where the attacker is coming in through. And as soon as the attacker has access of our endpoint, guess what? They now have read access to Active Directory, and they're on the network, so they have network access. So it is a multifold issue. The fact that AD is insecure, it has been for years. Now the attackers are doing recon against AD, so this becomes this common issue. And if we look at the steps that the attacker is making, they first of all are attacking the endpoint. So they're going after the weak link in the whole process, which is our employees. And they're using phishing attacks, using ransomware, they're using malware, they're using any possible way to get access to that endpoint. And what they want to do is they want to compromise the endpoint through these attacks. And the goal is to get privilege escalation. So they're diving into the LSASS. They're going in and they're getting, different aspects of authentication, such as hashes. They're utilizing misconfigurations to get these hashes, such as SPNs and stuff like that. So the attacker is wanting to get the local privilege access so then they can install tools and then do recon. They need the local privilege to install the tool. Once they have it, they only need read access to do recon. And they're getting all of this information that's in the back end of Active Directory with regard to users, with regard to groups, with regard to computers. And they're gathering the information to know exactly where to attack so that they then can attack. And the goal on attacking Active Directory is to get privileged access. So you've heard the terms lateral movement and you've heard the term privilege escalation. And that's exactly what these attackers are wanting to do, because privileges are what they're after. If they can get privileges, now they can access not only Active Directory, but they can access your data. They can access your databases. They can access everything else that's on your network. So what I have seen is that Active Directory becomes the center of the attack. And if we look at the attack in full breadth with the kill chain model and the framework, we can see that they start with the recon and then they get into the endpoint. That's 0 through 4. 5 through 8 is where Active Directory lives. And that's where we haven't spent a lot of time as a security community in the whole kill chain framework. We have a lot of different solutions that are targeting our endpoints. We have antivirus, we have endpoint protection, we have all of these different things in place. And those are still needed. I'm not saying those aren't needed. I think today, even though we have a lot of complaints about antivirus, we still need it. It's a component in the overall process, but where we haven't spent a lot of effort is in 5 through 8. And this is where I want to really focus today, is how can we put effort into lateral movement and privilege escalation so that we can stop when the attacker is accessing our information. And we do have some solutions around this. And my view is we need those solutions because they do a really good job for what they do, but what they don't do is secure Active Directory, right? I mean, if we look at SIEM solutions and we look at AD monitoring solutions, the majority of SIEM solutions and AD monitoring solutions are relying on the event logs. Well, guess what? An event log only tells you after something happened. So it's already happened, right? So what we need is something that's going to tell us something might happen. Well, that's exactly what I'm talking about with an attack pathway, okay? So we have solutions that are here and you still need them. But I'm telling you, they're not giving you the inside scoop on the overall Active Directory security that you currently have. They're not giving you a heads up when a security configuration is created that's a security issue. They're not telling you that. And that's really where we need to be. That is where we're going to get the core Active Directory security. Again, I'm going to go back to 2 main concepts: misconfigurations that lead to an attack, and this concept of an attack pathway. Now, the attackers are leveraging certain aspects of your environment, okay? Now, some of these things you've heard of, some of these things you may not have heard of, and many of these you haven't really done an investigation on whether or not they're set properly. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about where these are in the environment and tell you that we need to investigate these now and over time. So that's where we start to basically fix our environments so the attackers can't do recon to find out where these things are, okay? So when we start talking about these concepts, we have to understand where they are. Now, let's dive in and talk about, for example, service principal names. So I'm going to jump into my environment here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into my domain controller so we can investigate where some of these settings are. Now, if I look at, just a realistic user, so I'm going to pick on Derek here a little bit, and I'm going to show you where this service principal name would be. So if I come in here to my attribute editor and I come down here to service principal name is right here. Now, what exactly is the service principal name? The service principal name is used by applications and services to allow communication with that account if it's being used as the service account for that service, right? But when I configure this, the user, the attacker, can actually do a query on this to find out which accounts have a service principal name. And this service principal name becomes very important because of the attacks that can be done on it. And so what I'm suggesting you do is you go through and you investigate which accounts have a service principal name associated with them and make sure that they are protected. One of the key ways that you can protect a service principal name is don't give it high privileges. Don't make it a domain admin, for example, because what can happen in an attack is called the Kerber roast. And the Kerber roasting is when the attacker is utilizing the information, either it's attacking the hash or it's getting the TGT, the ticket granting ticket, with regard to the service principal name. So we need to protect that. We also have to investigate and protect Kerberos delegations. Now, Kerberos delegations basically allow the attacker to do impersonation. So if I jump back into my environment here, I can actually kind of show you where all of the delegations are that are dangerous. Now, this is actually Alsid, and it is telling you where the current configurations are that you need to go investigate. So this is a look on my current deviants, the settings that are incorrect. So you see that I have some users and I have some computers. Both users and computers can have insecure Kerberos delegations. Now let's go investigate Adam, right? So I'm going to come over here to my environment and I'm going to jump in here to Adam's account, and you will see here that Adam does not have his account set up to be secured against delegation. But if I simply select this setting for Adam, that will protect it. Now, one of the things that I've heard over the years with regard to security and Active Directory is you may get a report of a certain setting and say, okay, I think it's secured, but do you really know? Well, that's where a solution, in my opinion, like Alsid comes in, where it can tell you where the security issue is and it can tell you if it's secured. So in this case, when I went in and I cleaned up Adam's account, Adam no longer is on the list. So whether I'm talking about a user or a computer, now I can see my progress. I can see that it's no longer an issue. So this is one of the key benefits of having a core security solution is you not only want the alerts to tell you a setting is set to be incorrect, you want to be able to make sure that it is maintained over time. And this allows you to have an interface to see your progress. So these are some different things that you can do with regard to these accounts. Now, if I come back in here to my dangerous delegations and I say, for example, look at a computer account, right? So here I have a workstation that's insecure. So if I come over here to my workstation and I go to the properties of my workstation, it is a little bit different configuration, but here you can see that it's set for delegation for any service. When you set it down here, it actually will clean that up and that computer account no longer will have a security issue. Again, these are all based on these core attacks that are being used within Active Directory. Every single one of them is noted. And actually one of the things that we utilize is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And the MITRE ATT&CK framework is very deep and broad with all of its configurations within not just Active Directory, every type of operating system and device. And we think it is very deep and broad and use that as a foundation. Okay. Now, another thing that we need to look at, believe it or not, it's still important, is whether or not a user account has passwords that are set to not expire. To not be required. Okay. Now, you may be thinking, what does that mean? Is that possible? Now, some of you have heard of this and some of you haven't. Okay. So how do you know if a password is required or not? Well, this gets a little sticky because it's actually not a direct attribute in Active Directory. It's part of an attribute in Active Directory. Now, if I want to know which accounts have this, again, it's very easy when you use a security tool to see this, okay? So I'm going to come in here and I have a direct indicator of exposure that tells me the accounts that have this. Oh, it's this one right here. So accounts that may have an empty password, okay? It's the same as not being required. And you'll notice here that I have Adam that's set up for this. So what does that look like for Adam's account? Well, Adam's account here, if I go into the attributes and I come down here to the user account control, you'll see password not required, okay? So how does this get set to be that way? Well, there's a couple of ways to actually do that, right? One of them is if you come in here, you can actually just run the net user command and set password required to no, and then you need something to tell you that that was triggered, right? So here I can come back into my settings and you'll see that Adam now and Derek both are listed because it's Derek is the one that I set to not have a password. So how do you clean this up? Well, again, you would just reverse this and you would say, yes, a password is required. And that's all that's required to do this, right? So the idea is that you need something that is floating to the top, as I say, these security issues, so you can go through and you can clean up your Active Directory. Because all of the things that I'm talking about here, and a user in your environment can run an LDAP query, can use a tool like Bloodhound or anything else, and they can actually get the same information, right? Now with Anonymous is actually part of the pre-Windows 2000 compatible access. And this is a group that's been there since 2000, and you need to go investigate that as well, okay? Now, if I show you where that is, that will help clarify. I always like to kind of show where things are within Active Directory. So if I come in here to my built-in, you will see that there is a pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group, and this should actually be empty of users, okay? So that's how you can go clean that up. But it's not just misconfigurations of users and groups. You also have to pay attention to the details also within Active Directory. And here's where we get into some other concepts around attacks and misconfigurations. So Active Directory delegation is one critical aspect, okay? Now, these Active Directory delegations have been around for a long time, and organizations are using them, but what we need is we need the ability to be able to know if they've been misconfigured. So say, for example, I come in here and I run this delegate control wizard. This delegate control wizard is basically allowing me to go in and I can specify who can do what in the environment. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to add the user John here, and John is going to be able to reset passwords for users that are in this OU. So John can reset now the password for any of these users. So that type of thing is actually very desired within Active Directory because it's delegation. But you know, you need to have the ability to kind of see those things. You need to be able to do what's called threat hunting for that. Now, you will notice that here, I actually am tracking that level of detail, and you'll see here that there was an ACL change. Now, but I didn't trigger an IOE because, again, one of the things that I don't want to do is I don't want to go in and just alert the security team constantly about these things. And in this case, you know, what we do is we go in and we illustrate what possibly could be a negative setting. So, you know, we kind of provide a couple of different views on, again, core security of Active Directory so you can see the details around that. So threat hunting is an important aspect of this. Being able to see the details is very important. So one of the things that I highly recommend, whether you use a solution to do it, like a core security proactive tool, or you go in and do it manually, you need to make sure that you clean up your core Active Directory delegations. Now, with regard to GPO access, you know, most of the time group policy is secure by default. But again, there are delegations within Active Directory that you need to make sure that you go investigate, and you need to have a solution that's going to bring those to the forefront as well. So that gives you an idea of the different things that the attackers are wanting to take advantage of. Now, let's put this into a real-life scenario from the attacker's point of view. Now, this is an example of the Ryuk malware, and many of you have read about this, but maybe you don't know the details. So if we go through the details here, you can see that, first of all, the ransomware gets into the endpoint, which we talked about, through a phishing attack or something else. Then the user opens it, but when the user opens it, it may not immediately encrypt everything. And what it's going to do in most cases is it's going to wait for an Active Directory misconfiguration. So it can actually, because it's now on the machine and it has read access, it can actually investigate what's happening in the back end from Active Directory. So ransomware isn't just ransomware anymore. It's kind of scary. And it's doing things in the background to get more exposure. So what is happening with many of these malicious applications that get into our environments is it's not just immediately going for the throat to encrypt, it's waiting to encrypt more. And in this case, what it can do is it can take advantage of certain things, you know, SMB exploits, compromise accounts through lateral and movement and privilege escalation. And then it will get into your environment, and it won't only encrypt. You know, it may come in, but now it may access your database. It may do other things. So these attackers are utilizing the kill chain. They're utilizing misconfigurations in order to get other things in your environment. So what the attackers want is the attackers want to be persistent, right? So the attackers are going through the kill chain, getting into the environment, and once they get in the environment with any privileges, they're trying to take advantage of it. For example, what they want to do is they want to get in and take advantage of, for example, the admin count and the admin SD holder. Let me talk a little bit about this attack. So in this particular case, the attacker is going after a backend process which was meant to secure the environment, but now they're using it to exploit the environment. So what Microsoft did, I think it was around 2003, is they wanted to clean up what was happening in many Active Directory environments. You got to consider back in 2003 that AD was new. So what was happening was administrators would go into their privileged groups and they would modify the access control list of their privileged groups, therefore breaking what the privileged groups could do. So Microsoft added in a process called SDProp, Security Descriptor Propagation, and they did this by using a new object called admin SD holder. Now this admin SD holder is used for its access control list. You'll see it here. So every 60 minutes, the SDProp process will update every privileged user and group. Well, how does it know what a privileged user or group is? Well, a privileged user and group is one that has an admin count equal to 1. So every 60 minutes, the access control list of this object will be laid on top of every object that has an admin count equal to 1. Now, let's see if I can actually float this to the top so you can see this. So here you will see, if I try to get some additional information for you, you will be able to see right here. I've been doing some things right here. See all of these ACL changes? These are all of the changes that occurred during the SDProp. So again, every 60 minutes, this is going to come through. And you can see it here because the trail flow is actually every change that's happening in Active Directory. Actually, Alsid for AD doesn't utilize the event logs. We actually use the replication stream to get our information. Anyway, so let's go back to the attack. So during the attack, a privileged user, in order to get persistent privileges will modify this admin SD holder and add in a new entry, such as here. And they don't have to do anything else. Why? Because the SD prop process will do the work for them. Look at here. If I come to domain admins, you will see that it's on every single privileged group. That's a pretty slick attack, isn't it? So what needs to happen is this needs to be investigated in real time to know if this is occurring. So right here, you can see that I have floated to the top for the security team the fact that this particular object has been compromised already. So now I can drill down and I can see the details of which entry is the problem, and I can go clean that up. So using a tool that talks about attack pathways allows you to now do the cleanup. So some of these are direct attacks, such as like a DC sync attack, where others are more stealthy, and it may not be an actual attack yet. But what the attacker wants to know is, where are all of these openings so that they can go in and make modifications that will allow them to get privileged access. So if you go secure all of these, now the attacker doesn't have the ability to go in and do that. Now, there are other types of attacks that also the user is exploiting, such as a DC shadow and a DC sync attack. Now, these DC shadow and DC sync attacks are very stealthy and very wicked. They're stealthy because they actually bypass the logs. So SIEMs and AD monitoring solutions can't actually see the attack. The best they can do is look at other tangential things that are being logged around the attack. But again, when you have a solution that's looking at the core of Active Directory, such as Alsid, it knows firsthand when you have this type of attack. Now, what is an example of what's happening during this attack? Well, what's happening during this attack, for example, a DC shadow attack, is that the attacker will create a fake domain controller. This fake domain controller now communicates with the real domain controllers. And as you can see here, they can inject backdoors into objects and their attributes. They can modify SID history, they can modify admin SD holder, and yes, they can even do primary group ID. And these primary group IDs, very wicked because they're hard to actually see, okay? Now, if I kind of jump back into my environment, I can show you what this looks like. Now, first of all, what I want to do is I want to show you that we float to the top when a primary group ID is bad, and you'll see that I have this account right here. So now I can go into Active Directory, I can go to that account, and I can see that that account's primary group ID is actually not set to the default, which is right here. Now, the default is 513, which is a normal users group. You will see that this one is set to 512. Now, if I try to fix this, it's not going to allow me to fix it. So if I try to go in and take this user out of the group, right? So if I come in here to my users and I go to my domain admins and I go to Emperor Sith, if I try to remove this, it's going to say, sorry, you can't do that because the primary ID is 512. And they don't want you to not have a user in there. But if I do a DC shadow attack, I can actually set the primary group ID of a user to 512 without it being in domain admins. Again, pretty slick, huh? So what Alsid does is it's looking at the replication stream, specifically of a DC shadow attack, and it's looking for the new object to be created in the replication stream. That is never posted in a log, but we can actually see it. So this is the type of attack where we can go in and look and actually tell you information. So what's the issue with SIEMs and AD monitoring? Well, they're needed, right? SIEMs are excellent for all of the other devices gathering the event logs to do correlation. AD monitoring is excellent for compliance. But if it relies on the event log, by the time it gets the event is completed. So let me give you an analogy. If AD security were driving alerts, this is where an AD monitoring solution comes in. It basically says, the wall was hit, right? So if it's already in the event log, hasn't the event already happened? So AD monitoring solutions are just telling you, hey, this is what happened. There is no attack path. There is no warning about that. Now, if we continue on and talk about the reality that events can get overwhelming. There are so many events. It's called event fatigue. Often an attack went through the event log, but the security team has so many events they're looking at, they missed it, right? And if we use some correlation with regard to our driving example, well, correlation really is telling you, yeah, other things were attacked too, but they were already attacked. So what we need is solutions that are going to allow you to have more warning up front, right? We need no delays. We need to have fewer alerts, and we need the information to be precise. So what we need is something to tell us, warning, there was a misconfiguration that leads to an attack. That would look something like this, okay? Alsid is telling you beforehand, warning, you're about to hit a wall. And now that you were told you're about to hit a wall, you can actually do something about it and change it, and instead now have an open path in front of you. Your misconfigurations, and you are making sure that the attackers have nothing to attack. So there is no wall that's hit. Now you have open road in front of you, okay? So the way that can occur is to see current misconfigurations as well as new misconfigurations that open up an attack pathway. And I've been showing you that all along, right? So ideally, what you want the ability to do is, instead of having the view of all of the potential attacks, right? This is a view of all of the potential attacks. There's easily 25 to 30 checks on the back end of any one of these IOEs. As soon as you link Alsid to your Active Directory environment, now you see where the attacker can actually attack. The goal is for you to go in and clean up Active Directory. As I showed you, as Active Directory is a living, breathing thing and things change over time, when changes occur, basically those are going to float to the top, and now you're going to get new alerts here that tell you exactly where things are inside of your Active Directory and where you need to take action. Okay, so I'm telling you exactly what the detail is. These are the details around the misconfigurations. I also can tell you when an attack is occurring. So I can tell you about current misconfigurations. I can tell you about existing attacks, right? This is done. Alsid works with no agents, no privileges. It's read-only access. Nothing is installed on your domain controllers, okay? Nothing. In my opinion, and I think everyone else that's in security's opinion, the reality is, if you install an agent that has privileges on a domain controller, that becomes an attack pathway. Now they can use the security tool to attack Active Directory. We completely disagree with that. In real time, we're using the Microsoft API for replication to pull information out. Okay, no false positives. We can communicate with your SIEM, so your SIEM can actually do real-time actions. Okay, we also provide you access with eventless attacks such as DC Sync and DC Shadow. So we want you to secure your Active Directory environment from the bottom up, not after something happens. So Active Directory is easy to attack. Attackers are leveraging misconfigurations that you have today. They are leveraging misconfigurations that are going to occur tomorrow. So you need something that's going to tell you immediately that that attack pathway is open. SIEMs and AD monitoring, it's too late, okay? So let's focus on misconfigurations. Let's focus on attack pathways. And now we can actually secure Active Directory. So David, that puts me at the end of the presentation. I'm hoping we have some good questions out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Really cool presentation, Derek. It's kind of mind blowing, all the things that can happen to, attack an Active Directory infrastructure. Kind of scary, actually. So thank you for
True.
thank you for sharing that demo with us. Especially, I love the live demos. So let's see. First question that came in here. They're asking. You say that Alsid can get all this info without agents or privileges. How is that possible?
Yeah, it's something that I think most of us have considered, but didn't consider it fully. So if I kind of just quickly jump back in here and I talk about this, there are three main areas that are read access to a user. One of them is sysvol, one of them is the Active Directory database itself through LDAP, and the other one is the replication stream. So what we're doing here is we're actually simply by going in and looking at, you'll see here in our domain management, all I've done is I pointed to the IP address of the PDC emulator, and I'm using an account that has read access, and I can get all of that information. So, the attackers can do this too. What we're doing is we're organizing it into the trail flow as well as into these IOEs. So instead of you're securing to analyze everything, we're analyzing it for you and floating that to the top. So that's how we're doing it with read access.
Very nice. Very nice. I like that. No agents, no special privileges. Another question here. They said with AI and machine learning, attacks can be seen, such as password spray attacks. Does Alsid use AI and ML, and can they see those types of attacks?
We do not use any machine learning or artificial intelligence, but we can see those attacks because we're looking at the replication stream. So again, inside of the, if I did have a password spray attack, obviously that is a 1 or 2 password attempts against your entire list. So what we do is we put thresholds in and look for that, and you can set those thresholds. You can totally tailor it based on what you want to see and at what level. So we're able to do it without machine learning, without artificial intelligence. There is down the road the possibility of adding some machine learning and AI, but today we don't need it, and we're still able to see those attacks.
Very nice. Very nice. Another question, you said Alsid has no false positives. How's that possible?
So what most SIEMs or AD monitoring solutions rely on is some type of rule. And that rule could be as anything of, okay, if a user's added to domain admins. So in our opinion, a user being added to domain admins is needed. I mean, there has to be some users in domain admins. So what we provide is this concept of the attack path. And what we allow you to do is for totally different aspects of every IOE, you can make settings that will allow certain things to function without you being told about every time. So every single IOE that we have, every single one of them, every one that you see here, if it is triggered into an alert, it means that an attacker could use that to attack Active Directory. So everything that we're floating to the top and warning you about could be used as an attack. So there are no false positives inside of Alsid. It is the reality. It could be used. So if you see a square, an IOE, you better pay attention because that could be used by an attacker. Now, let's say, for example, that you had to have a setting and you didn't want to see it again. Well, we allow for that, right? We allow you to come in here and just say, ignore this because you have to have that. But keep in mind, we floated that to the top to tell you because an attacker could use that. So what you need to do is then go in and protect that account from an attack in the best way that you can. We all know that in every production environment, there's going to be some attack pathways. What we want to do is reduce it as much as possible, know about them, and then secure it in other ways.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know we're running out of time on this. We got lots of great questions coming in. We're trying to answer those electronically as best we can. Thank you, everyone. Final question I think we have time for, and that is, if someone's interested in the Alsid for AD solution, if this resonated with them, they're concerned about Active Directory security, what do you recommend they do, Derek?
So I recommend hitting the Alsid website and doing some reading. We have all of the IOEs listed there, so the indicators of exposure, so you can actually see what's happening in the back end that we're looking at. We have some good documentation on what an attack pathway is. Our co-founders actually wrote the thesis paper upon which Bloodhound for AD is built. So if you're familiar with Bloodhound for AD, the attack pathway should make total sense to you, and that's exactly what's happening in the back end. And then, if you want to see Alsid live in your environment, we do trials all the time, and that's really the best way to see things. Also, if you want to contact us and see more of a personal demonstration, we can do that as well. So there's many different angles that I would suggest. One is education, and two is contacting us. That's why I have my email here. Please just email me. Work from home, I'm constantly checking my email, and I'd be more than happy to answer questions or actually give you a demo.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you so much, David, and thanks for the audience again. I appreciate your time.
For more information, visit alsid.com.